You're fired. Doyen Kang's voice cut through the kitchen like a blade dragged across steel, and every pot on the stove seemed to still at once. Renata Boone did not flinch. She set down her wooden spoon with the same unhurried precision she used for everything else in her life, wiped her hands on her apron, and turned to face the man who owned the mansion, the 6 cars in the garage, and apparently, in his own mind, her future. Fired, she repeated, tasting the word like it had gone bad. For what, exactly? The soup was perfect. The soup, Doyen said, was not the problem. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen in a charcoal suit that had never once, in the 8 months Renata had worked in this house, looked wrinkled or out of place. His jaw was tight. His dark eyes, usually flat and unreadable, carried something jagged tonight, something that did not belong to a man discussing dinner. Then what was the problem? Renata said. It wasn't a question. It was a dare. You let a stranger into my kitchen. Your kitchen, she said, had a man collapsed on the floor of the service entrance, bleeding through his shirt. I am a chef, Mr. Kong, not a war criminal. I gave him water and pressed a towel to his side until your people showed up. That is called being a person. That man, Doyen said, each word measured like a blow, was supposed to be dead 3 hours before he reached my door. You made it possible for him to reach it alive. The kitchen went silent except for the low simmer of a pot Renata had forgotten about. Somewhere behind Doyen, in the hallway, she could hear the quiet shuffle of Miho, his second, pretending not to listen. So, I saved a man's life, and that is a crime in this house, Renata said. Good to know. I will remember that for my resume. Personal chef, fluent in French sauces, terminated for demonstrating basic human decency. Something flickered across Doyen's face, gone before she could name it. He did not answer. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, his footsteps precise on the marble, and Renata stood there with her hands shaking slightly at her sides, not from fear, but from the particular fury of being wronged by a man who could not even be bothered to argue properly. She had taken this job 8 months ago because the money was absurd and because, if she was honest with herself, she had wanted to see how the other half lived, the half that ate dinner in silence at a table long enough to seat 20 and never once said thank you. She had not expected to like the work. She had not expected, either, to notice the way Doyen Kong held a glass of wine like it might betray him if he gripped it too hard, or the way he said her name, when he bothered to use it at all, with a weight the other syllables in his mouth did not carry. She packed her knives that night. She did not cry. She told herself she did not care. The knock came at 6 in the morning, before the sun had fully committed to rising over the hills behind the estate. Renata opened the door of her small guest cottage on the property, still in the flour-dusted t-shirt she slept in, and found Doyen Kong standing on her doorstep, looking like a man who had not slept at all. I need you to stay, he said. Renata blinked at him. You fired me 12 hours ago. I know. You used the word fired. Loudly. In front of your staff. I know what I said. His voice, always so contained, had an edge to it this morning, something raw underneath the discipline. The man who collapsed in my kitchen. His name is Sungo. He worked for me for 6 years before he decided 6 years was not enough and started selling what he knew to a man named Park Il-hwan, who has spent the last decade trying to take everything that is mine. When I found out, I gave the order. I did not expect him to survive long enough to reach my own house. So your problem, Renata said slowly, was never me. It was that I accidentally helped a traitor stay alive long enough for you to have to deal with him again. Yes. And now you want me back. Yes. Because you're short a chef, or because you actually think you owe me an apology? Doyen's jaw worked once, twice, before he answered. Because in 8 months, you are the only person in this house who has ever spoken to me like I might actually be wrong about something. I do not like that quality, in most people. I find I dislike its absence more. Renata studied him for a long moment. The morning light was unkind to no one standing in it, but it was especially generous to him, catching the sharp line of his cheekbone, the tired shadow beneath his eyes. She thought about the absurd salary. She thought about the mortgage on her mother's house back in Georgia that she was still paying down one careful check at a time. She thought, against her better judgment, about the particular silence that had followed her out of that kitchen the night before and how it had felt less like anger and more like grief. "I want it in writing," she said, "that I am never fired again for saving a life."
Done.
"And I want a raise." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but close enough to count as a first. "Also done." "Then I suppose," Renata said, stepping back to let him into a doorway he had no business standing in, "you'd better tell me the rest of it. Because a man like you doesn't drive across his own property before sunrise for a chef he doesn't need." Doyen did not answer that. He simply looked at her, and for the first time in 8 months, Renata felt the full weight of being looked at by him, not through him, not past him, but seen the way she had not been seen by anyone in longer than she wanted to admit. She went back to work that same afternoon. The mansion had a way of swallowing sound, thick carpets and high ceilings absorbing every raised voice before it could travel, but that evening the kitchen felt different, charged in a way Renata could not name. She moved through her prep with the same efficiency she always had, dicing shallots with the rhythm of a woman who had spent 15 years learning that a knife forgives no hesitation, but she was aware, in a way she had not allowed herself to be before, of every time Doyen's footsteps passed near the kitchen door. Miho found her at the counter that night, leaning against the frame with the particular ease of a man who had killed people and slept fine afterward. He was younger than Doyen, quicker to smile, though the smile never quite reached whatever lived behind his eyes. "You are either very brave or very stupid," he said. "I've been called both," Renata said, not looking up from the onions. "He does not rehire people. Ever. I have seen him let go men who built this empire with him and never once look back. Maybe I make a better soup than they did." Miho laughed, short and genuine. "Maybe. Or maybe Doyen Kong has finally found someone in this house who is not afraid of him, and that is worth more to a man like him than loyalty ever was." Renata set down her knife. "Is that a warning?" "It is an observation," Miho said, pushing off the doorframe. "Park Il-hwan is not finished with Sungo's betrayal. He will come looking for what Sungo promised him, and this house is not as safe as it looks from the kitchen window. Watch yourself, chef." He left her standing there with the smell of onions and the sound of her own heartbeat, which had picked up despite her best efforts to keep it steady. That was the moment everything changed, though she would not understand the full shape of it for days. The first real crack in Doyen's composure came 4 nights later, during a dinner that was meant to be routine. Renata had prepared a dish she was proud of, a short rib braised for 6 hours in a sauce built from gochujang and pear, and something she refused to name even under threat, and she had carried it out herself because the usual server had taken ill. She found Doyen alone at the long table, staring at nothing, a glass of untouched whiskey sweating a ring into the wood beneath it. "You're not eating," she said, setting the plate down. "I'm thinking about Sungo." His eyes lifted to hers, sharp and searching, as if trying to determine how much she already knew. "About my brother," he said finally, and the word landed heavy in the room. "Sungo was recruited by someone close to my family a long time ago. He was meant to become one of us. Instead, he became a lesson in what happens when you trust the wrong blood." "You had a brother," Renata said quietly. It was not a question. "I had a brother," Doyen said. "He is not dead. He simply chose Park Il-hwan's money over what our father built. I have spent 3 years pretending that does not cost me anything to think about." Renata pulled out the chair across from him, without being invited to, and sat down. It was not her place, and she knew it, but something in the way he held that glass, like it was the only steady thing left in the room, made her stay anyway. "You don't have to pretend it doesn't cost you something," she said. "Least of all with me. I already saw you shout at a woman for saving a life. I've seen your worst. Nothing you say now is going to make me think less of you." Doyen looked at her for a long moment, and something in his face loosened, just slightly, the way a fist loosens when it finally stops expecting to be hit back. "You're the first person who has said something like that to me in years," he said. "Everyone else in this house is afraid of what I might do if they see me as anything less than certain. I'm not everyone else." "No," he said, and this time the almost smile made it all the way to his eyes. "You're not. They sat in silence after that, not an empty one, but the kind that hums with things neither of them was ready to say aloud. And when Renata finally rose to clear the untouched whiskey and the half-eaten short rib, Doyen's hand brushed hers on the plate, brief and accidental and entirely deliberate all at once. Neither of them mentioned it. Neither of them forgot it either. The danger arrived on a Tuesday, the way danger so often does, dressed in the clothes of an ordinary afternoon. Renata was in the market 3 miles from the estate, picking through a crate of Korean pears with a kind of focus she gave to every ingredient, when a black car pulled to the curb and a man she did not recognize stepped out and blocked her path. "You're the chef," he said. It was not a question. "Depends who's asking. Park Il-hwan sends his regards. He wanted you to know that the man you saved, the one bleeding in Doyen Kang's kitchen, he did not survive the conversation that followed. But he also wanted you to know something else.
He knows your name now.
He knows where you buy your pears." Renata's blood went cold, but her voice did not shake. "You can tell your boss I don't scare easy, and I definitely don't scare overproduce." The man smiled, unpleasant and slow. "You should. Doyen Kang has taken things from Park Il-hwan that cannot be replaced. It seems only fair that the debt travels both directions." He left without another word, sliding back into the car and pulling away, and Renata stood in the middle of the market with a pear still in her hand, gripping it so hard her knuckles had gone pale. She told Doyen that night, standing in his study while he listened with a stillness that frightened her more than any shouting could have. "You should have called me the moment it happened," he said, his voice low and controlled in a way that told her the control was costing him. "I'm telling you now. That is not the same thing. I am not one of your soldiers, Doyen. I don't report in. I handle my own business, and then I tell the people who need to know." He crossed the room in 3 strides and stopped close enough that she could smell the cedar and smoke note of his cologne, close enough to see the muscle working in his jaw. "You are the reason he knows he can hurt me," he said. "Do you understand that? He cannot touch my empire directly, so he will try to touch the one thing I have let myself care about in longer than I can remember." The words hung between them, more confession than warning, and Renata felt something in her chest tighten at the admission, at the way his eyes had gone from controlled to something closer to desperate. "Then teach me how to protect myself," she said. "Because I am not leaving this house, and I am not going to spend the rest of whatever this is being the reason you're afraid." Doyen's hand came up, slow, deliberate, and brushed a strand of hair from her face with a tenderness that felt almost unbearable coming from a man built entirely of precision and violence. "I told myself hiring you back was about the soup," he said quietly. "I was lying to myself." Renata did not step back. "I know," she said. "I've known for a while." Neither of them moved for a long moment, the air between them thick with something neither was ready to name, and then Doyen stepped back first, jaw tight, controls snapping back into place like a mask returning to its rightful position. "I have to end this," he said. "Properly. Before it costs either of us something we cannot afford to lose." The next 2 weeks passed in a strange, taut rhythm. Renata cooked. Doyen made calls behind closed doors, his voice low and clipped in a language she did not speak but understood the shape of anyway, the particular cadence of a man arranging a war. Miho came and went at odd hours, his usual ease replaced by a watchfulness that put Renata on edge every time she caught him checking the windows. She should have been afraid. She was afraid, in the honest hours of the night, when she lay awake listening for cars on the gravel drive that did not belong there. But underneath the fear was something else, something that had been growing steadily, since the morning Doyen stood on her doorstep and admitted he had lied about why he needed her to stay. She found him in the kitchen one night, an unusual place for him, standing at the counter where she usually worked, staring at a knife block like it held answers. "You're not supposed to be in here without me," she said, leaning in the doorway. "I wanted to see what it looked like when the danger wasn't standing in it." "The danger is always standing in it," Renata said. "I just make it look like dinner." He almost laughed, a low sound that surprised them both. "Park Il-hwan has agreed to a meeting. Neutral ground. He believes he is coming to negotiate the return of information Sungo stole before he died. What he does not know is that I have already found the buyer he intended to sell it to, and I have already made sure that buyer will not be answering his calls again. And what happens at this meeting? I end it, Doyen said simply. One way or another. Renata crossed the kitchen and stood close enough to touch him, close enough that she could see the tension coiled in his shoulders. I want to be there. Absolutely not. Doyen.
No.
His voice cracked like a whip, sharper than she had heard it in weeks. I have already lost one person I could not protect. I will not add your name to that list. You don't get to decide that alone, Renata said, refusing to back down even as his eyes darkened with something that was not quite anger. I have already been threatened over a bag of pears. I am already in this. The only question is whether I face it standing next to you, or hiding in this house waiting to find out if you're coming back. Something in Doyen's expression broke, just slightly, the careful architecture of his control shifting to reveal the man underneath it, tired and afraid in ways he had spent years learning to hide. If something happened to you, he said, quiet now, I do not know what I would become. Then make sure nothing does, Renata said. Together. He reached for her then, both hands framing her face with a gentleness that felt like a confession all its own, and when he kissed her it was not soft, not tentative, but certain, the kind of certainty that came from a man who had spent weeks pretending he did not already know exactly what he wanted. Renata kissed him back with the same certainty, her hands fisting in the front of his shirt, and for a long moment the danger outside the walls of the mansion did not exist at all. When they finally broke apart, Doyen rested his forehead against hers, breathing hard. You are the most reckless decision I have made in 10 years, he said. Good, Renata said. I'd hate to be boring. The meeting was set for an abandoned dockyard on the edge of the city, chosen, Miho explained, because it offered no cover for either side to hide extra men, and because Park Il-hwan fancied himself a man who respected tradition even as he broke every rule that mattered. Renata stood beside Doyen in the gray evening light, dressed in dark clothes Miho had provided, her heart hammering steady and hard against her ribs. Stay behind me, Doyen said. No matter what happens. I make no promises. He looked at her, exasperated and something close to fond despite the circumstances, and then Park Il-hwan's car rolled to a stop at the far end of the dock, and there was no more time for arguing. Park Il-hwan emerged flanked by 2 men, older than Renata expected, with the kind of composed cruelty that came from decades of getting exactly what he wanted. His eyes found Renata immediately, and his smile was thin and knowing. So this is the chef, he said. I confess I expected someone less interesting. I get that a lot, Renata said, refusing to let her voice shake. Enough, Doyen said, stepping forward. You came for information. I am telling you now, the buyer you intended to sell it to is no longer in a position to purchase anything. Your leverage is gone. Whatever Sungo promised you died with him. Park Il-hwan's smile did not waver, but something behind his eyes sharpened. Perhaps. Or perhaps I came for something else entirely. A demonstration, Doyen. A reminder that everything you love can be taken exactly as easily as everything you have already lost. He nodded once, and one of his men moved, fast, reaching for the pistol at his hip, and Renata did not think. She acted, throwing herself sideways into Doyen and knocking him off balance, just as the shot rang out, the bullet cracking into the metal container behind them instead of the space where he had been standing a half-second before. Chaos erupted. Miho's men, hidden in the shadows of the dockyard where Park Il-hwan had not thought to look closely enough, moved fast and precise, and Doyen rolled with Renata still gripped tight against him, coming up in a crouch with a gun she had not even seen him draw, and put 2 shots into the man who had fired first before the man could raise his weapon again. Park Il-hwan's face twisted, fury replacing composure at last. You should have let her die in your kitchen the night Sungo crawled and bleeding, he snarled. Instead you made her the reason I finally have something worth taking from you. You will not touch her, Doyen said, and his voice carried a promise colder than anything Renata had heard from him before. Renata, still crouched low, spotted movement to their left, one of Park Il-hwan's remaining men circling wide to flank them, and she did not wait for permission. She grabbed a length of heavy chain coiled near a shipping container and swung it hard into the man's legs as he passed, sending him sprawling, and Miho finished the job before the man could rise again. Park Il-hwan, seeing his advantage collapse around him, backed toward his car, his composure finally cracking into something desperate. "This is not finished," he spat. "It is," Doyen said, closing the distance between them with lethal calm. "You have nothing left to leverage.
No va a ir.
No information. No men. Walk away now, and perhaps you keep breathing long enough to regret tonight in private." For a long, taut moment, Park Il-hwan stood frozen, calculating, and then something in Doyen's stillness, the absolute certainty of a man who had already decided what he would do if pushed one more inch, convinced him. He turned, got into his car, and left the dockyard without another word, taking his remaining man with him. The silence that followed was enormous. Renata's hands were shaking now that the adrenaline had nowhere left to go, and Doyen turned to her immediately, gripping her shoulders, his eyes scanning her for any sign of harm. "You could have been killed," he said, his voice rough. "So could you," Renata shot back. "That's usually how it works when someone is shooting at you. You threw yourself into a bullet's path for me." "I made a choice," Renata said. "The same one you keep making every time you try to keep me out of danger, and fails spectacularly. We're a match set, apparently." Doyen laughed, short and disbelieving, the sound of a man who had spent his whole life braced for loss and had just watched someone choose to stand in the way of it instead. He pulled her against his chest, holding her there in the cold evening air, and Renata felt his heart pounding as hard as her own. "I told myself I could not afford this," he murmured into her hair. "I was wrong. I cannot afford to lose it." They drove back to the mansion in silence, her hand resting in his the entire way, and when they finally stepped through the front door, Miho gave them a look that was equal parts relief and amusement before disappearing down the hall to give them the space neither of them had asked for, but both clearly needed. In the quiet of the kitchen, the one room in the house that had always belonged more to Renata than to him, Doyen turned to face her fully for the first time since the dockyard. "I do not know how to do this," he admitted. "I have spent my entire life building walls so thick that nothing could get through them. You walked through anyway, without even trying." "I wasn't trying to walk through anything," Renata said. "I was just trying to make good soup and not get fired unfairly. And yet here we are." "Here we are," she agreed. He reached for her hand again, turning it over in his, tracing the small burn scar along her wrist that she had earned years ago in some other kitchen, in some other life before his. "I want you to stay," he said. "Not as my chef. Not because I need someone to make dinner. I want you to stay because the house feels different when you are in it, and I have finally realized I do not want to know what it feels like when you are not." Renata studied him for a long moment, this man who had fired her over a misunderstanding and shown up at her door before sunrise to fix it, who had confessed to a wound he had never spoken aloud to anyone else, who had put himself between her and a bullet without a single moment of hesitation. "I'm not the kind of woman who disappears just because things get complicated," she said. "I already decided that the night I found Sungo bleeding on your floor. I'm still deciding it now." "Then decide it with me," Doyen said. "Not as an employee. As mine if you will have me, the way I already know I am yours." Renata smiled, slow and certain, and stepped into the space between them that had been closing for weeks. "I suppose someone has to keep you fed," she said. "And apparently someone also has to keep you from getting shot. Seems like a package deal." "A very demanding package," Doyen said, the almost smile finally becoming a real one. "You have no idea," Renata said, and kissed him first this time, without hesitation, without fear, in the kitchen that had become the one place in that enormous, silent house where something honest had finally been allowed to grow. Outside, the estate settled into its usual quiet, the danger that had circled it for weeks finally driven back into whatever shadow it had crawled from. Inside, in the warm light of the kitchen, Doyen Kong, the most feared man in 3 cities, stood with his forehead pressed to the forehead of a woman who refused to be afraid of him, and for the first time in longer than either of them could remember, neither one of them was thinking about war. If you found yourself holding your breath through every page of the story, Make sure to like this video and subscribe for more dark romance tales just like it. Drop a comment and let me know what you would have done in Renata's shoes, and tell me which story you want to see told next. There are more dangerous men and braver women waiting just around the corner, so stay close, because this is only the beginning.